Okay, once again, welcome to the fascinating world of economics. This is chapter 2, section 2. Today we're going to talk about command economies. Okay, so command economies are ones that you find mainly in communist countries. Now, the main factor of a command economy or a communist country is that everything is centrally planned. It's all centrally planned, and we learned from section 1 that the central government makes all the economic decisions. The 3 questions: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, they're all determined by the government. Okay, so only some people have money to buy available products. In the old Soviet Union, when it was under communism, only members of the Communist Party could partake in that, really benefited from that economic system, which is the reason that it eventually just fell apart. So again, command economies are where the government makes all the economic decisions. Okay. So in all societies, government exerts some control over people's lives. Okay. In a centrally planned economy, like in a communist country like Cuba, like North Korea especially, the government exerts great control. Okay. It determines businesses to operate. It determines the amount to produce. In fact, in communist countries, there's really no businesses. Because the government owns everything. There's no entrepreneurs. You can't start a business in a communist country. So especially like North Korea and Cuba, everything is owned by the government. It determines who is employed. You don't get to choose what you're going to major in college. If you're a smart person, the government's going to tell you, we need you to major in this and do this. Okay, so you really don't get much choice in these countries. Okay, they determine everything. Your hourly pay, your pay scale, all that is determined by the government. Okay. Socialism and communism. The father of communism, we often refer to Karl Marx as the father of communism. Okay, so Karl Marx was alive during the Industrial Revolution, the latter part of the Industrial Revolution. He saw a lot of people suffering. He saw people working 7 days a week. He saw people working 14 hours a day. He saw children as young as 5 years old spending their lives working in coal mines, crawling through tunnels, bringing out coal. He saw a great deal of suffering. So he wrote a book called Das Kapital, which we'll get to here in a second. But he proposed these type of economic systems. Okay, in socialism, which is a combination of government control and a market, the government owns some of the factors of production. Okay, so really what it means is the government owns the major factors of production. So in some socialist countries, like in Europe for a long time, the French government owned the banking system. The French government was in charge of the computer technology sector. The French government was in charge of the car industry. They owned Renault, the cars in France. All those in the United States, they're all owned by private companies. And so a lot of socialist European countries became socialist after World War II. Okay, so in communism, there is no private property. And if there's no private property, you can't own a business. And so there's little political freedom. For example, if you criticize the government in China, you're probably going to end up in jail pretty fast. And you may stay there, or they may even execute you. China executes a lot of people who they call political dissidents. Okay, they're people who disagree with the government. If they're found out, they end up in jail, and sometimes they're executed. And so it requires what we call an authoritarian system. Both of these, socialism and communism, but especially communism, requires that the government exercise huge authority over the people. So for example, in Cuba, when you drive around the streets of Havana, you'll see tanks sitting on street corners or jeeps with machine guns mounted on them. That is there to scare people. That's there to tell people, hey, you better listen or else bad things are going to happen to you. The same thing would be true in North Korea. When you see pictures of North Korea, a lot of the people are dressed in military uniforms. It's a military society. Everybody's dressed the same. If you're not in a military uniform, everybody has the same clothes on. Okay, so because they don't worry about fashion. Okay, so they have to have an absolute control. It's an authoritarian system. Okay. In Europe, what they have is what we call democratic socialism. And it's a political process where the government owns the basic institutions or in industries. Okay, so like I said, in France, it would be like with the government in Mexico. Pemex is the oil company of Mexico. It's owned by the Mexican government. Okay. In other socialist countries like Germany, Italy, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, England, the government owns major parts of the economy. And so there are other smaller businesses that's allowed to be private, like you'd own restaurants, could be a private business, or a bakery be a private business, or you might make clothes in a private business. But the major essential industries in Europe are owned or overseen by the government. Okay, so we call that central planning. They make all the decisions for the government-owned industries. All right, so that is democratic socialism. Most of Europe went that way after World War II, because if you remember, we had the stock market crash in the 1930s, and that just didn't affect the US, that affected the entire world. The whole world is really tied to the US economy. If our economy is bad, then most of the world economy is bad as well. And so after the Great Depression, a lot of people in Europe were convinced, and we got to get more government control. We can't have any more crashes. Okay, so that's the direction they went. It didn't work out so well for several of those countries, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, Karl Marx, as I said before, he lived during the Industrial Revolution. He argued that factory owners used the workers. Exploitation is the word, okay, that they were exploited by the factory owners. Exploitation means you use somebody for your benefit. And so the workers in the factories, Karl Marx believed, were exploited by the factory owners, and they were. They worked 7 days a week, sometimes 14 hours a day. There were no laws to govern labor law. There were no rules. They could do whatever they wanted to do. And so what he predicted in his book, Das Kapital, which he wrote with Friedrich Engels, he said eventually these workers are going to get fed up with this stuff, and they're just going to overthrow everything, and they're going to take control. Okay, so after they take control, they will establish a new system in which everything is evenly distributed throughout society. So the main theory behind communism is we take all the resources, all the wealth, and we just give it to everybody evenly. Everybody gets the same share, whether you're a doctor or whether you're a carpenter. Okay, whether you make clothes or whether you're a farmer, everybody, the share just gets evenly distributed. And it sounds really good in theory. The problem is some people want more. Some people want to work hard and make more. And some people don't like the fact that they work really hard and a lot of their wealth is taken and spread to other people. It's just a theory, okay? So in reality, it hasn't worked very well. At one time there's 40 communist countries in the world. We're really left with 4, and really it's only 2. That would be Cuba and North Korea, because China's really not, when it comes to economics, they're really not communist anymore, and neither is Vietnam. Okay, so it hasn't worked very well in general. It says here, there are no pure command economies today, and I would say that North Korea is, though. They are a pure command economy, pretty much. Again, here they're going to talk about North Korea. A lot of their wealth is used to build military weapons. Kim Jong-un has this idea that North Korea's going to take over the world. They're going to rule the whole world. This little tiny country in Asia's going to take over the whole world. Okay, so what he does is he builds military weapons and he fires rockets off to scare everybody. However, when we got to around the 2000s, when Bill Clinton was president, there were millions of people starving to death in North Korea. And so the world came and kind of saved them all, and then Kim Jong-un went right back to building military weapons again. So communism in general has been pretty much a failure wherever it's been tried. Okay, so it says here, in theory, communist systems are fair to everyone. In practice, there's a lot of disadvantages. Okay, central planners do not understand local conditions. Workers have little motivation to be productive, and their artificially low prices lead to shortage. The perfect example of this is Venezuela. I had a student come in from Venezuela in the middle of the year last year, and he said exactly this. He said, you can't get any food there. You can't even get toilet paper in Venezuela. He said, if you criticize the government, they come arrest you and nobody ever sees you again. Okay, so that's exactly what happens in a command system or in a communist country. So it's nice in theory, it's just never worked in reality. Okay, it says here, when the wind of change blows, Some build walls, while others build windmills, a Chinese proverb. Okay, that's really about adapting to change. Okay, all right. The key concepts here, all right? Centrally planned economy, socialism, and communism. That's basically what we learned about in this section. And I will see you next time in the fascinating world of economics.